I remember the precise moment my quiet life, painstakingly built on decades of hard work and careful saving, began to crumble. It was a Sunday, sun-drenched and peaceful, until Sarah's desperate voice sliced through the calm like a razor. She needed money. A lot of money. And something in her tone, a raw edge I'd never heard before, told me this wasn't just another bad idea. It was a prelude to catastrophe. My morning had begun like any other in my suburban haven. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of lavender from the sachet tucked beneath my pillow. At 78, my routine was a cherished ritual, a soft anchor in a world that often felt too loud, too fast. I'd wake with the first blush of dawn, enjoy my Earl Grey by the kitchen window, watching the cardinals peck at the bird feeder, and then settle into my worn armchair with the Sunday crossword. My small, immaculately kept house was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a sanctuary, a testament to a life lived with purpose and prudence. My husband, Thomas, bless his soul, would have been proud. He'd taught me the value of $1, the quiet dignity of independence. After he passed, I'd held on to his lessons, nurturing his legacy with a fierce, quiet devotion. The small pension, supplemented by my careful investments and the modest inheritance, was enough. More than enough, in fact, to live comfortably, and I'd always hoped to leave something for Sarah and her children. But Sarah, dear Sarah, my only daughter, had a knack for finding herself in one financial quagmire after another. Her husband, Mark, was charming, yes, but a dreamer, a perpetual entrepreneur whose grand visions consistently dissolved into dust and debt. Over the years, I'd offered advice, occasionally a small loan, always with the caveat that it was the last. My patience, like my savings, was not infinite. The phone rang just as I was considering the clue for a 5-letter word for quietude. I saw Sarah's name flash on the caller ID and felt an immediate tremor of apprehension. It was too early for a casual chat, too urgent for a simple check-in. "Mom? Can you talk?" Her voice was thin, reedy, utterly devoid of its usual forced cheerfulness. It was a sound that instantly twisted my stomach. "Of course, dear. What is it?" I tried to keep my tone even, but my grip on the receiver tightened. "Mark and we need to talk to you. In person. It's important. Very important. Can we come over today? Please, Mom." The plea in her voice, raw and unvarnished, struck me deeper than any dramatic declaration. This wasn't about a leaky roof or a car repair. This was something bigger, darker. My mind immediately conjured images of bankruptcy, foreclosure, some new, insurmountable crisis. I sighed, a long, weary exhalation that felt weighted with the accumulated disappointments of years. "Yes, Sarah. Come over. I'll put the kettle on." I hung up, the crossword forgotten, the quietude shattered. The peaceful Sunday morning had vanished, replaced by a growing knot of unease in my chest. I knew, with the cold certainty of instinct, that whatever Sarah and Mark were about to propose, it would demand far more than just my money. It would demand a piece of my carefully constructed peace, and perhaps a piece of my very soul. My daughter, Sarah, arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, her usual punctuality a stark contrast to the chaos that seemed to perpetually swirl around her and Mark. She was dressed in a crumpled linen dress, her usually vibrant blonde hair looking dull and unkempt, a stark contrast to the meticulously coiffed woman she usually presented to the world. Mark, her husband, followed close behind, a forced, affable smile plastered across his face, a cheap bouquet of supermarket roses clutched in his hand. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit, a desperate attempt at respectability that only highlighted his underlying desperation. "Eleanor, darling," Mark boomed, striding in as if he owned the place, a habit that had always grated on my nerves. He offered the wilted roses with a flourish. For the most wonderful mother-in-law a man could ask for. I took the flowers, the petals already drooping, and offered a tight-lipped smile. "Thank you, Mark. They're lovely." I placed them quickly in a vase, trying to ignore the faint, cloying scent of cheap perfume clinging to them. Sarah avoided my gaze, her shoulders slumped, wringing her hands at her sides. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a butter knife. "Sit down, both of you," I said, motioning towards the sofa. I settled into my armchair, crossing my hands in my lap, trying to project an air of calm I certainly didn't feel. "Now, Sarah, you said it was important." Sarah fidgeted, glancing at Mark as if for permission to speak. He cleared his throat, taking center stage with practiced ease. "Eleanor, we wouldn't bother you if this wasn't truly a matter of utmost urgency. A game changer, if you will. A paradigm shift for the entire family." I raised an eyebrow. "Spare me the business jargon, Mark. Just get to the point." He chuckled, a brittle, artificial sound. "Right to it, then. Sarah and I have been working tirelessly on a new venture. Something revolutionary. Something that will not only erase all our past, shall we say, missteps, but will secure our financial future and yours for generations to come." He then launched into his pitch, a dizzying array of buzzwords and projections about a disruptive technology in the wellness sector. It involved an app, a subscription service, and a vague promise of bioharmonizing frequencies. As a former accountant, my mind immediately flagged the numerous holes in his logic, the fantastical returns, the complete absence of concrete details or a viable business model. It was a house of cards built on wishful thinking and desperation. Sarah sat beside him, nodding weakly, her eyes wide and pleading. Every now and then, she'd interject with a faint, "It's truly amazing, Mom," or "We've thought of everything." But her voice lacked conviction, her eyes betraying a deep-seated fear that mirrored my own growing apprehension. She was caught, I realized, in Mark's web, her own judgment clouded by a desperate hope that this, finally, would be their salvation. Mark finished with a flourish, his eyes alight with a feverish gleam. "And for this groundbreaking opportunity, this chance to invest in the future, we just need a modest initial capital. A bridge, if you will, to cross into prosperity. $150,000. The number hung in the air, a chilling echo in my quiet living room. $150,000. It was nearly half of my carefully protected savings, the sum I'd earmarked for my own medical emergencies, for repairs to this old house, for a legacy for my grandchildren. I stared at them, my gaze unwavering. Mark's smile faltered under my scrutiny. Sarah shrunk further into the cushions. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Mark," I said, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. "You've presented me with a fantasy. There are no concrete plans, no proven market, no realistic projections. This isn't a business, it's a gamble. A very, very bad gamble." Mark's face tightened. "Eleanor, you don't understand the modern economy. This is the future." "No," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "This is the same old story, Mark, just with different buzzwords. You've lost money on every revolutionary idea you've ever had. And each time, you've come to me, asking me to bail you out." I looked at Sarah, my heart aching for the despair etched on her face. "Sarah, you know this is true. We've been through this before." Sarah finally met my gaze, her eyes brimming with tears. "But Mom, this time it's different. We're so close to losing everything. The house, the kids' college fund." Mark promised. Her voice trailed off, choked with emotion. "Mark promises many things, Sarah," I said, my voice softening slightly, but my resolve remained firm. "But promises don't pay the bills. Hard work and sound judgment do. And I cannot, in good conscience, risk my security, the security I've built for myself and for your children, on another one of Mark's pipe dreams." I took another steadying breath. "The answer is no. I will not give you the money." The word hung in the air, a final, unyielding pronouncement. "No." For a long moment, silence descended, heavier and more suffocating than before. Sarah let out a soft, choked sob, burying her face in her hands. Mark's affable mask finally cracked, revealing a flicker of raw fury in his eyes. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The charm, the forced politeness, vanished as quickly as smoke. "Eleanor," he began, his voice dangerously low, stripped of all pretense. "Are you truly so heartless? To watch your own daughter, your own grandchildren, lose everything? To stand by while we're on the precipice of financial ruin when you have the means to prevent it? My own anger, long simmering beneath the surface, began to stir. Heartless, Mark? Is it heartless to protect what I've spent a lifetime building? Is it heartless to refuse to throw good money after bad into a bottomless pit of your own making? I leaned forward slightly, my gaze cutting into him. I've watched you squander every opportunity, every inheritance, every loan. And now you expect me to sacrifice my security for your latest illusion. Sarah lifted her head, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. Mom, please. We don't have anywhere else to turn. What are we going to do? Her voice was laced with a desperate, almost accusatory tone. You should have thought about that before you put yourselves in this position, Sarah, I replied, my voice firm despite the ache in my chest. It pained me to see her like this, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that giving in now would only perpetuate the cycle, dragging me down with them. There are consequences for your choices. And I will not become one of them. Mark pushed himself up from the sofa, his movements stiff and abrupt. Fine, he spat, his voice laced with venom. If that's how you feel. If you value your precious money more than your own flesh and blood. He turned to Sarah, his expression a cruel parody of concern. Come on, Sarah. There's clearly no reasoning with her. Sarah rose slowly, her eyes still fixed on me, a mixture of hurt, anger, and betrayal swirling within their depths. It was a look that pierced me, a wound self-inflicted, but no less painful. She didn't speak, didn't even offer a goodbye. She simply followed Mark out of the living room, her steps heavy and defeated. I watched them go, the sound of their retreating footsteps echoing ominously through my quiet house. The front door clicked shut with a hollow thud that reverberated through the very foundations of my peace. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence, feeling the emptiness they left behind. A wave of guilt washed over me, cold and relentless. Had I been too harsh? Too unyielding? But then, the image of Mark's face, contorted with thinly veiled rage, flashed in my mind. The predatory gleam in his eyes when he spoke of his revolutionary business. The desperation in Sarah's voice, yes, but also the underlying expectation that I would, as always, be their safety net. No, I had made the right decision. My conscience was clear, even if my heart was heavy. Yet, as the afternoon wore on, a different kind of unease began to settle over me. It wasn't just the sadness of a family rift, it was a colder, more insidious feeling. Mark's parting words, his thinly veiled accusation, resonated with a sinister undertone. It wasn't just a family dispute, it felt different. More threatening. I tried to shake it off, to immerse myself in my usual Sunday evening rituals. I prepared a simple dinner, read a chapter of my book, listened to some classical music. But the quietude that had once been my comfort now felt brittle, fragile. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the leaves outside, made me jump. My imagination, usually a gentle companion, began to conjure unsettling scenarios. It wasn't paranoia, not exactly. It was the accumulated wisdom of a long life, the subtle hum of instinct that warned me when something was truly amiss. And something I felt deep in my bones was very amiss. Their departure had been too cold, too final. It felt less like the end of an argument and more like the beginning of something far more unsettling. A premonition, chilling and persistent, began to take root in my mind. This wasn't just a rejection, it was a declaration of war. 2 days later, the unsettling premonition still clung to me like a persistent chill. I'd tried to distract myself, burying my nose in a particularly dense historical biography and tending to my small, meticulously ordered garden. But the image of Mark's face, contorted in anger, and Sarah's tear-streaked eyes, accusing and wounded, kept intruding. I'd even considered calling Sarah, perhaps to offer a softer word, but the memory of Mark's veiled threats held me back. I knew a gesture of reconciliation now would only be seen as weakness, an opening for another assault on my carefully guarded finances. The doorbell chimed precisely at 3 o'clock. My heart gave an involuntary lurch. It wasn't a casual visit. Mark never bothered with such niceties unless he wanted something. I peered through the peephole, and indeed, there he was, standing alone, a forced smile playing on his lips. In his hand, he held not another wilted bouquet, but a small, neatly wrapped gift. My apprehension intensified. This was a different tactic. I opened the door cautiously, leaving the chain on. Mark. What a surprise. My voice was flat, devoid of warmth. Eleanor, good afternoon. He beamed, his eyes, however, betraying a flicker of something calculating. I know our last conversation was strained. And for that, I sincerely apologize. I came to mend fences. To admit that perhaps I was a little overzealous. And that you were right, of course. Always right. My eyebrows rose. This was a new one. Mark admitting fault was akin to a unicorn sighting. Oh? And what exactly was I right about, Mark? He chuckled, a forced, theatrical sound. About the business, of course. It was a foolish pipe dream. Sarah and we've talked it over, and we realized we were desperate. And that desperation made us blind to reason. Your reason, specifically. You're a shrewd woman, Eleanor. Always have been. He extended this small package. This is just a little something, a peace offering. To show there are no hard feelings. I took the package, my fingers brushing his. His hand was surprisingly cold. The gift was a small, beautifully crafted wooden bird, a cardinal, no less, precisely the kind that visited my feeder every morning. It was a thoughtful, almost uncanny choice, designed to disarm me. And for a fleeting second, it almost worked. Almost. That's very kind of you, Mark, I said, my voice still wary. But what brings you here alone? Sarah's at work, he explained, a shade too quickly. And I thought it best to clear the air, just us. No pressure. No business talk. Just family. I was hoping, perhaps, we could share a cup of coffee? Catch up properly? I brought some of those specialty beans you like, the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. My favorite. Another calculated move. He remembered. This wasn't just a casual apology, it was a performance, carefully orchestrated. My instinct, the silent alarm bell that had been ringing intermittently since Sunday, now blared in my ears. The sweetness of his demeanor felt cloying, artificial, a thick syrup coating something bitter and dangerous beneath. Coffee sounds, pleasant, Mark, I said, stepping back and unchaining the door, allowing him entry. My mind, however, was already racing, assessing, planning. The house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a stage and I, unwillingly, was playing a part. I led him into the kitchen, the knot of unease in my stomach tightening with every step. I kept my back to the wall, metaphorically and literally. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken intentions. This was not a peace offering. This was something else entirely. Something cold. Something dangerous. I gestured towards the kitchen, keeping my movements deliberate, almost stiff. My senses were on high alert. The smell of the cardinal figurine, a faint waft of cedar, mixed with something else, something Mark carried on him, a metallic tang, almost imperceptible, hidden beneath a strong, almost sickly sweet cologne. Make yourself comfortable, Mark, I said, indicating the small breakfast nook. I'll get the kettle on. He, however, had other ideas. Nonsense, Eleanor. Let me. A true peace offering involves a bit of humble service. Wouldn't you agree? He moved past me with surprising swiftness, heading straight for my coffee maker, already pulling out the bag of specialty beans he'd mentioned. Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. My favorite. He truly had done his homework. Or, more accurately, he knew my habits intimately. I watched him, a silent sentinel by the kitchen counter, my hands clasped tightly behind my back. He seemed remarkably at ease, almost too much so. He ground the beans, the whirring sound temporarily filling the awkward silence. Then, as he prepared the filter, a new scent began to waft through the kitchen, subtly at first, then more distinctly. It wasn't the rich, earthy aroma of freshly brewed coffee that I loved. No, this was different. It was a sharp, almost medicinal smell, an acrid undertone that tried to mask itself beneath the robust coffee scent. My nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. My years as a meticulous homemaker, with an acute sensitivity to anything out of place, had honed my sense of smell to an almost clinical degree. I could tell the difference between a freshly baked pie and one that had sat for a day. I could detect a faint gas leak before anyone else. This smell, it was unsettling. chemical, unnatural. Mark, oblivious, or perhaps pretending to be, hummed a tuneless melody as he poured the hot water over the grounds. He was meticulous, almost overly so, in his preparation. He even warmed the cups beforehand, a detail I usually appreciated, but now it felt like a chilling theatrical performance. "There we are," he announced, turning to me with 2 steaming mugs, a triumphant grin on his face. "A perfect brew, just for you, Eleanor." The least I could do after my rather ungentlemanly display the other day. He pushed 1 mug towards me on the counter. "Cream and sugar, as always, I presume?" My eyes darted from his face to the mug he presented, then to the one he held for himself. Both bore the same rich, dark liquid. But the chemical tang in the air was undeniable, clinging to the steam rising from my cup. It was faint, yes, but to my finely tuned senses, it was a siren call of alarm. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a primal drumbeat of warning. My mind raced. Why was it so faint? Perhaps diluted? Designed to be slow-acting, to mimic a natural cause? The thought was terrifying, chilling me to the bone. My own daughter's husband, standing before me, with a cup of poisoned coffee. The image was too monstrous, too unthinkable. But the smell, the calculated apology, the sudden visit, it all coalesced into a horrifying certainty. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice remarkably steady, betraying none of the terror swirling inside me. My gaze met his, searching for some flicker of conscience, some hint of the monstrous intent I suspected. But his eyes were like polished stones, cold, unyielding. He took a sip from his own cup, a picture of leisurely enjoyment. My moment was now. My survival instinct, honed by decades of quiet battles and an unshakable will to live, surged to the forefront. I had to act, and I had to act fast, without a hint of hesitation or suspicion. Mark, still sipping his coffee, glanced towards the window. "Oh, look, Eleanor. Is that a blue jay? I haven't seen one of those in ages around here." It was a clumsy distraction, poorly executed, but it was all I needed. As his eyes flickered towards the window, I moved. In a blur of motion, fueled by pure adrenaline, my left hand reached out, grabbing his mug, while my right hand simultaneously snatched my own. The swap was seamless, almost imperceptible. 2 cups, identical in every way, exchanged in less than a second. My movements were fueled by an urgency born of mortal fear, a speed I hadn't known I still possessed. His gaze returned to me, a faint, questioning frown creasing his brow. "Did you see it?" I offered him a serene, almost innocent smile, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Oh, I believe I did, Mark. A truly magnificent creature. Thank you for pointing it out." I took a careful, measured sip from my cup, the one that was now his. The coffee was strong, bitter, but blessedly free of that insidious chemical tang. He, in turn, took another deep swallow from his cup, the one that had been intended for me. The trap was set, and he had walked straight into it. The game, I realized with a chilling clarity, had just begun. And I was playing for my life. The coffee, now undoubtedly laced with whatever poison Mark had intended for me, went down his throat with a gulp. I watched him, my heart a trapped bird fluttering wildly in my chest, yet my face remained a mask of polite composure. I even managed a small, convincing smile. He finished his sip, then placed the mug carefully back on the counter, a faint sigh of contentment escaping his lips. That's better. Nothing quite like a good cup of coffee to smooth things over, Eleanor." He chuckled, but there was a subtle shift in his eyes, a glint of something that wasn't quite peace. Perhaps he was scrutinizing me, looking for a reaction. I nodded, taking another slow, deliberate sip from the cup now holding the safe brew. "Indeed, Mark. You always did make a strong coffee." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out, maintaining the facade. Just then, his hand, which had been resting casually on the counter, twitched. His eyes, fixed on me, began to lose their sharp focus, blurring at the edges. A faint pallor spread across his face, replacing his earlier forced joviality. He blinked slowly, then more rapidly, as if trying to clear a sudden fog from his vision. "Are you feeling all right, Mark?" I asked, my voice laced with a feigned concern that was utterly chilling in its sincerity. He shook his head slightly, a confused frown replacing the calculating glint. Just a little dizzy all of a sudden. Probably just skipped lunch. Happens, you know. Old age catching up with me, I suppose. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was weak, breathy. But it wasn't old age. It was the poison taking hold. I could see the subtle signs, the pupils dilating slightly, the faint sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead, the way his hand trembled as he reached out to steady himself against the counter. My pulse quickened, a morbid fascination battling with sheer terror. This wasn't a thriller novel, this was my life, playing out in my own kitchen. He swayed, grabbing the edge of the counter more firmly. Whoa, just a bit lightheaded. His voice was slurred, the words thick on his tongue. He tried to take a step back, but his legs seemed to betray him. He stumbled, bumping clumsily against the kitchen table. The peace-offering cardinal figurine on the counter wobbled precariously. Perhaps you should sit down, Mark, I suggested, my voice still unnervingly calm, though my insides were churning. I remained rooted to my spot, watching him with a predatory intensity, every fiber of my being screaming for self-preservation. He didn't respond. His eyes rolled back in his head for a fraction of a second, then snapped back into a vacant stare. His body went rigid, then sagged, collapsing like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He slid down the cabinets, hitting the floor with a muffled thud, his limbs splayed at an awkward angle. His breathing became shallow, ragged, a faint rasping sound filling the sudden, terrifying silence. He was unconscious. Or worse. My mind, despite the shock, immediately switched to crisis mode. There was no time for hysterics, no room for regret. My life, my very existence, depended on my next actions. I looked down at the inert form of my son-in-law, the man who had just tried to murder me. A cold, hard resolve settled over me, chilling my veins more effectively than any poison. First, I had to ensure he was alive. Not out of compassion, but out of necessity. If he died here, in my house, the consequences would be catastrophic for me. I knelt, cautiously, by his side, avoiding direct contact with his skin. I placed 2 fingers on his neck, feeling for a pulse. It was weak, thready, but there. He was alive. For now. Next, the evidence. The cups. The container of coffee. Everything. I had to erase any trace of my discovery, any hint of the switch. My mind, trained by years of meticulous accounting, worked with a terrifying efficiency. I sprang up, moving with a speed that belied my years. I snatched both mugs from the counter. My mug, containing the safe coffee, I quickly emptied into the sink, rinsing it thoroughly. His mug, the one with the poisoned remnants, I carried with extreme care to the downstairs bathroom. There, I poured the dark liquid into the toilet, flushing it repeatedly until not a trace remained. Then, I rinsed the mug meticulously, wiping it dry with a paper towel, examining it for any residue. It was spotless. I returned it to the kitchen, placing it casually in the sink alongside its rinsed counterpart. The bag of Ethiopian Yirgacheffe beans. Mark had brought it. It had to go. I opened the kitchen trash can, buried the bag deep beneath a pile of old newspapers and food scraps, then pressed the lid down firmly. My gaze swept the kitchen, every corner, every surface. Had he dropped anything? Had I missed anything? My eyes landed on a small, almost invisible vial, nestled on the floor where Mark had stood. It was tiny, made of dark glass, and the cap was slightly ajar. A faint, almost imperceptible medicinal smell still clung to it. My breath hitched. This was it. The smoking gun. Without hesitation, I picked it up with a paper towel, careful not to touch it directly. I knew enough about poisons to know that direct contact could be dangerous, and that fingerprints were paramount. I didn't recognize the vial, but I knew what it represented. I quickly wrapped it in several layers of paper towel, then placed it in a small, Ziploc baggie, which I then tucked deep into the pocket of my housecoat. It was my secret weapon, my proof. Finally, the phone. My hand trembled as I picked it up, my fingers hovering over the dial pad. I had to call for help. I had to play the part of the distraught mother-in-law, the innocent bystander. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. 911, I whispered, then cleared my throat, forcing a tremor into my voice. Yes, hello? I think my son-in-law has had some kind of medical emergency. He's collapsed in my kitchen. My voice, though feigned, cracked with genuine emotion. The terror was real, the horror of what had almost happened, and what I had just done. But beneath it all, a cold, hard resolve had taken root. This was no longer just about money. This was about survival. And I had just won the first round. The paramedics arrived with a wailing siren that seemed impossibly loud in my usually quiet suburban street. They burst into my kitchen, their urgency a stark contrast to the almost serene horror I felt. I stood aside, a picture of a frail, shocked elderly woman, pointing vaguely at Mark's inert form. He just collapsed, I stammered, my voice trembling convincingly. We were having coffee, and he just suddenly got dizzy, then fell. I don't know what happened. They worked quickly, efficiently. One paramedic checked his vital signs, the other began asking me questions. Any known medical conditions, ma'am? Heart problems? Diabetes? I shook my head, my eyes wide with feigned distress. Not that I'm aware of. He's always been healthy. A bit stressed with work, perhaps, but otherwise fine. I offered them the most plausible, innocuous explanation, carefully omitting the strange smell and the convenient blue jay. They gently lifted Mark onto a stretcher, his pale, slack face a grim testament to the speed and efficacy of whatever substance he had ingested. As they wheeled him out, 2 police officers entered, their presence casting a long, intimidating shadow over my sunlit kitchen. Detective Morgan, a stern-faced woman with observant, dark eyes, introduced herself. Mrs. Vance, I'm Detective Morgan. Can you tell us exactly what happened? Her voice was professional, polite, but her gaze was sharp, missing nothing. She swept the kitchen with a glance, lingering on the 2 coffee mugs now innocently sitting in the sink. I recounted my carefully constructed narrative, Mark's unexpected visit, his apology, his offer to make coffee, the sudden dizziness, and then the collapse. I omitted the details of the strange smell, the blue jay, and most critically, the precise moment of the cup swap. I stuck to the truth as much as possible, twisting it just enough to obscure the deadliest parts. Did he say anything before he collapsed? She pressed, her pen poised over a small notebook. Just that he felt lightheaded, thought he might have skipped lunch, I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on her, willing her to believe me. He seemed genuinely surprised. And the coffee? She asked, her gaze returning to the mugs. Did you both drink from it? Oh yes, I said, a faint smile playing on my lips, a touch of genuine irony coloring my voice. He made us both a cup. I just had a little, felt a bit too strong for me. It was a small lie, easy to explain away if she pressed. I also knew that if they tested the coffee from the mugs, they would find nothing. I had been meticulous. The detective made a few more notes, her expression unreadable. We'll need to speak with your daughter, Mrs. Peterson, once we have a clearer picture of her husband's condition. And we may need to take a sample of the coffee for analysis, just in case. Of course, detective, I said, gesturing vaguely towards the sink. Whatever you need. I just hope he's all right. My poor Sarah will be beside herself. The crocodile tears, I found, came surprisingly easily. The performance was exhausting, but absolutely necessary. Once the police had left, leaving behind an unsettling quiet, I finally allowed myself to sink into my armchair, the one where I usually did my crossword puzzles. My legs felt like jelly, and a cold sweat had broken out on my forehead. The adrenaline, which had coursed through me like a powerful electric current, was now receding, leaving me utterly drained. I closed my eyes. The image of Mark's face, pale and lifeless, burned into my memory. He had tried to kill me. My own son-in-law. And my daughter, Sarah, must have known. The bitter truth was a toxic taste in my mouth, far worse than any poison. The realization was a blow, shattering any lingering illusions I had about my family. My hand instinctively went to the pocket of my housecoat, my fingers closing around the small, Ziploc baggie. The vial. My secret. My proof. I pulled it out, examining it in the dimming light of the afternoon. It was small, unassuming, yet it held the power to destroy lives, including, perhaps, my own. I couldn't go to the police with this. Not yet. Not without more information, more certainty. How could I explain how I knew what was in the coffee? How could I explain the switch without incriminating myself, without making myself look like a paranoid old woman making wild accusations against her own family? They would never believe me. They would see it as the ramblings of a senile old woman, or worse, someone who had actively poisoned her son-in-law. No, I had to be smarter. I had to understand the full scope of their treachery. Why no? Why so desperate? What exactly was that poison? And how deep did Sarah's involvement truly go? My quiet life was indeed shattered. But in its shattered remnants, a new, steely resolve was forming. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the retired accountant who enjoyed her Earl Grey and her crossword puzzles. I was a survivor. And I was about to embark on an investigation of my own, one that would force me to confront the darkest corners of my own family. The peaceful routine I had cherished was gone, replaced by a dangerous game of cat and mouse. And I intended to win. The quiet of my house, once a source of comfort, now felt like a shroud. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking threat, every creak of the old floorboards a sinister whisper. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of hyper-awareness, jumpy at every unexpected sound, peering out of windows as if expecting Mark's ghost to materialize. The police had left, but their presence had only underscored the new, terrifying reality of my existence. Dinner was a tasteless affair, a few crackers and a slice of cheese, eaten mechanically as my mind raced through possibilities, dangers, and the crushing weight of betrayal. I tried to focus on the small vial hidden in my pocket, my only tangible proof, but even that felt insufficient against the enormity of what I faced. Around 7 o'clock, my phone rang again. It was Sarah. My heart, still battered from the day's events, clenched. I took a deep, fortifying breath before answering. Mom? Oh, Mom, it's awful. What happened to Mark? The hospital just called. They said he collapsed at your house. What happened? Her voice was shrill, laced with a potent mix of panic and, I suspected, a carefully constructed performance of innocence. Sarah, darling, calm down, I said, trying to infuse my voice with the appropriate amount of maternal concern, yet keeping a wary distance. I told the paramedics and the police what happened. Mark came over, we had coffee, and he just collapsed. Said he felt dizzy. They took him to the hospital. They're running tests. But how could this happen? She wailed, her voice cracking. He was fine this morning. This is just terrible. Is he going to be okay? I chose my words carefully. They said he's stable, but still unconscious. They're trying to figure out what it was. It was all so sudden, Sarah. A terrible shock. I listened intently, trying to discern genuine grief from calculated distress. There was a raw edge to her panic, but also a distinct lack of genuine surprise. It was as if she were surprised he had collapsed, but not entirely surprised by why. I have to go to him, she stammered, then paused. Mom, are you okay? You must be so shaken. I'm fine, dear, I said, a bitter irony lacing my tone that she couldn't detect. Just shocked. It was quite an ordeal. Let me know what the doctors say. Of course, Mom. I will. I'll call you the moment I know anything. She hung up, leaving me with the dial tone echoing in the quiet room. Her concern for me felt hollow, a perfunctory gesture. Her focus, clearly, was on Mark and what his collapse meant for them. I pulled the small vial from my pocket again, holding it up to the light. It was a dark amber glass, with no discernible label. This was no ordinary medicine. My mind, ever analytical, began to sift through what I knew. Mark's sudden collapse, the specific symptoms, the faint chemical smell. It pointed to something fast-acting, something designed to be lethal or, at the very least, incapacitating. My training as a former accountant, while not directly related to toxicology, had instilled in me a rigorous approach to data and a deep skepticism of anything that didn't add up. And nothing about this added up. I needed answers. My first step, information. I owned an old, reliable laptop, mostly used for email and online banking. Now, it would become my window into a world I never imagined I'd have to explore. I retrieved it from its drawer, the whirring of its fans sounding like a battle cry in the silence. I started with Mark's business. I typed wellness sector disruptive technology at bioharmonizing frequencies into the search bar. Pages upon pages of articles and forums appeared, mostly filled with hyperbolic claims and vague scientific jargon. I ignored the promotional fluff and focused on the critical reviews, the warnings, the outright accusations of scams. Sure enough, multiple articles detailed similar schemes, all promising quick riches, all collapsing under the weight of investor complaints and regulatory scrutiny. Several even mentioned specific individuals, charlatans with histories of similar failed ventures. A few familiar faces, photos of men with slicked-back hair and practiced smiles, flickered across my screen. None were Mark, but the pattern was undeniable. He was a small fish in a vast, murky ocean of fraud. Then I shifted my focus. I searched for Mark Peterson by name, adding keywords like fraud, investigation, bankruptcy. The results were alarming. There were several Mark Petersons, of course, but one, roughly my son-in-law's age, had a public record littered with financial judgments, bankruptcies, and even a minor SEC inquiry years ago that had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The addresses listed were consistent with places he and Sarah had lived. It was him. A history of financial ruin, meticulously documented in the public record. My heart sank lower. This wasn't just a misjudgment. This was a pattern of deliberate, calculated deception. He wasn't just a dreamer. He was a con artist. And he was desperate. Then came the chilling realization. If Mark was facing such dire financial straits, if he was truly on the verge of losing everything, and if my refusal to fund his latest scam was the final nail in his coffin, then my death would solve a lot of problems. I was a widow with substantial assets. Assets that, upon my demise, would likely pass to my only child, Sarah. And through Sarah to Mark. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine, far colder than any sudden draft. It wasn't just my savings, it was my life insurance, my house, my investments. All of it, a tempting prize for a desperate man. And Sarah, my daughter, caught between her mother and her conniving husband. Had she been an unwilling accomplice? Or something far, far worse? The question gnawed at me, a venomous worm burrowing into my heart. I couldn't bear to think of Sarah as a knowing participant in a plot to murder me. But the evidence, the cold, hard logic of the situation, pushed me towards that agonizing conclusion. Her feigned distress on the phone, the lack of true surprise. It all pointed to a terrible, undeniable truth. I continued my research, now focusing on the vial. I dared not open it, not yet. But I described its appearance, its dark glass, its small size, and the rapid, debilitating effects I had witnessed in a series of anonymous online searches. I cross-referenced medical journals, toxicology databases, even dark web forums, anything that might yield a clue. Hours melted away. The world outside my window turned from twilight to deepest night. My eyes were burning, my mind reeling from the sheer volume of disturbing information. But then, a few results began to stand out. Rare, potent sedatives. Fast-acting tranquilizers. And one, chillingly, a synthetic opioid derivative, powerful enough to induce respiratory failure and coma in minutes, often designed to be easily disguised in liquids and notoriously difficult to trace in small doses after the fact. It had been used in a few high-profile, unsolved cases in other states, often mimicking natural causes. The symptoms matched Mark's collapse almost perfectly. A synthetic opioid derivative. A silent, untraceable killer. Designed for deniability. My breath hitched. He hadn't just intended to incapacitate me, he had intended to ensure my quiet, untraceable death, making it look like an old woman's sudden heart attack or stroke. The truth was a cold, brutal slap. My own family. My daughter. The woman I had raised, loved, sacrificed for. The realization was a profound, agonizing wound. I was not just a victim of a crime. I was a victim of the ultimate betrayal. My quiet life had not just been shattered, it had been utterly poisoned. And the game, I knew, was far from over. I was now alone, facing a deadly enemy who still believed me to be a naive, unsuspecting target. This fight, I realized, was going to be the fight of my life. The night passed in a blur of frantic research and tortured introspection. Sleep was an impossible luxury, haunted by Mark's pale face and Sarah's hollow voice. By dawn, my eyes were gritty, my head throbbed, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years, honed by the cold fire of survival. I had a name for the probable poison, a terrifying understanding of Mark's financial desperation and the agonizing suspicion of Sarah's complicity. I carefully tucked the small vial, still wrapped in its layers of paper towel and plastic, into a hidden compartment in my old desk, a secret space Thomas had shown me years ago, meant for sentimental trinkets. It was safer there than in my pocket. My next step, I realized, couldn't involve the police directly, not yet. My story about Mark's collapse, while plausible, left too many unanswered questions if I were to suddenly accuse him of attempted murder, especially without irrefutable proof they would readily accept. An old woman's hunch wouldn't suffice against a well-dressed businessman, even a fraudulent one. I needed more. More evidence. More understanding of their motives and their exact plan. I thought of my lifelong friend, Betty. Betty Henderson was a retired schoolteacher, fiercely loyal, with a sharp wit and an even sharper tongue. She lived just a few blocks away, and we shared a ritualistic Friday lunch. She was the closest thing I had to family now, other than the two people who had just tried to kill me. But could I tell her the horrifying truth? The thought of burdening her with such a monstrous revelation twisted my stomach. Still, I needed a confidant, an ally, even if only a partial one. The phone rang again, pulling me from my grim thoughts. It was Sarah. "Mom?" "He's awake," she announced, her voice a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. "He's still very weak, and the doctors are baffled. They said it was some kind of severe neurological event, but they can't find any cause. He remembers nothing after having coffee at your house." My blood ran cold. He remembered nothing. A convenient amnesia or a genuine side effect of the poison. Either way, it played into his hands, presenting him as a victim. "That's terrible, dear," I said, forcing a sigh of relief. "At least he's awake. Tell him I'm sending my thoughts." "He's very confused," Sarah continued, her voice sounding genuinely troubled now. "He just keeps asking what happened, why he's here. And the police, they've been back. They're asking more questions. About his business, about our finances. It's a nightmare, Mom." "I'm sure it is, Sarah," I replied, a chilling awareness dawning on me. Mark's sudden medical emergency had inadvertently drawn police attention to their financial dealings, precisely what he would have wanted to avoid. My accidental retaliation had backfired on him in a way he couldn't have predicted. It was a twisted, almost poetic justice. "Mom, listen," Sarah lowered her voice, a desperate whisper. "Mark, he's saying you might be confused. He said you were talking about strange smells and that you seemed agitated. He thinks maybe you're not well." The insinuation hung in the air, a poisonous tendril curling around me. He was already trying to discredit me, to paint me as senile, to undermine anything I might say. My carefully constructed composure threatened to crack. The audacity. The sheer, unadulterated evil of it. "Is that what he's saying, Sarah?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "That I'm confused? Well, he's just worried, Mom. We both are. This whole thing, it's been a lot for you. For all of us." She was trying to soothe me, but the underlying message was clear. My sanity was now under attack. "I assure you, Sarah, my mind is as sharp as ever," I stated, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "My memory is perfectly intact. Tell Mark that. And tell him I hope he recovers quickly." I ended the call before she could offer any more veiled accusations. The conversation solidified my resolve. I couldn't trust Sarah. She was either a willing participant or a deeply manipulated pawn, but either way, she was a threat. And Mark was playing a dangerous game, trying to turn me into the villain, the mentally unstable old woman. My first urgent task was to secure my home. I might be physically frail, but my mind was my fortress. I immediately called a locksmith. I need all my locks changed, I explained, affecting a worried tone. My son-in-law, he has keys, and with his recent health scare, I'm just feeling a bit vulnerable. For security reasons, you understand. The locksmith, thankfully, understood perfectly and promised to come by that afternoon. Next, I turned my attention to a more modern form of security. I ordered a set of discreet, wireless security cameras online, choosing models that were small, easy to install, and offered cloud storage. They would be delivered the next day. My little haven, which had always been open and trusting, was about to become a high-tech fortress. As I waited for the locksmith, I sat down and began to write. Not a letter, not a diary, but a meticulously detailed document. I dated it precisely. I described everything: Mark's visit, his proposal, my refusal, his return, the special coffee, the strange smell, the Blue Jay distraction, the swift cup swap, Mark's collapse, my immediate actions to dispose of the tainted coffee, and the discovery of the small vial. I described the vial itself and my subsequent research into its probable contents. I named Sarah, detailing her phone calls, her attempts to discredit me. It was my death letter, my ultimate insurance policy. If anything happened to me, this document, hidden in a place only Betty would know to look for, would ensure the truth came out. It would be my voice from beyond the grave, accusing them with cold, hard facts. I wrote every detail, every chilling suspicion, every painful realization about my daughter's involvement. It was a confession of betrayal, written by the betrayed. I finished the document, printed it, and carefully sealed it in a waterproof envelope. Then, I wrote a separate, short letter to Betty, instructing her where to find the larger document in case of my unexpected demise. I entrusted it to her, subtly, at our next Friday lunch. I would tell her I was organizing my affairs and wanted her to hold on to important papers. She, bless her heart, would likely just nod and tuck it away without question. The quiet, peaceful life I had known was irrevocably gone. But I was not without my own resources. My mind, my cunning, my unwavering will to survive, these were my new weapons. The game had truly begun, and my opponents were about to learn that this quiet old woman had teeth. The locksmith came and went, replacing every lock in my house with new, unpickable cylinders. The satisfying click of the deadbolts felt less like a prison and more like a shield. The next day, the discreet security cameras arrived. I spent hours installing them, carefully positioning them to cover every entry point, every vulnerable corner of my property, ensuring their lenses were almost invisible to the casual observer. The footage would be streamed to a secure cloud server, a digital record of anyone who dared to approach my home. My sanctuary was slowly transforming into a surveillance outpost. The following Friday, I met Betty for our usual lunch at the quaint little diner downtown. She greeted me with her usual robust hug, her bright eyes scrutinizing my face. "Eleanor, you look a little pale, dear. Everything all right?" That business with Mark must have been quite a shock. "A shock indeed, Betty," I replied, managing a faint smile. "But I'm fine. Just a little tired." I ordered my usual tuna melt, the taste as bland as my emotions. Over sandwiches, I steered the conversation towards wills and legal arrangements, a topic that usually made Betty squirm. "Betty, you know how it is at our age. One starts to think about arrangements. I've been updating my will, and I have some important papers I'd like you to hold on to for me. Just in case, you understand. Nothing morbid, just being practical." Betty, bless her practical heart, simply nodded. "Of course, Eleanor. Always thinking ahead. Just put them in a sealed envelope, and I'll tuck them away in my safe deposit box." I handed her the envelope, carefully sealed and unmarked, containing the death letter and the brief instructions for her. It felt like passing a dangerous torch. A tiny spark of hope flickered within me, a safeguard, a promise that my truth would not die with me. In the days that followed, the phone calls from Sarah continued, a mixture of updates on Mark's slow recovery and persistent, subtle attempts to undermine my credibility. "Mom, the doctors still don't know what caused it. Mark's so frustrated. And he's still worried about you. He said you seemed so fragile that day. Are you sure you're sleeping enough?" I'm sleeping perfectly well. Thank you, Sarah, I'd respond, my voice ice cold. And I assure you, my memory is unimpaired. Each call chipped away at my remaining love for my daughter, replacing it with a cold, hard resentment. She was actively participating in this charade, this monstrous attempt to paint me as senile. It hurt deeply, but it also fueled my resolve. Then came the new tactic. A registered letter arrived from Mark's attorney. It was a formal request for access to my financial records, citing Mark's recent incapacitation and a vague concern for my financial well-being given my advanced age. It was a thinly veiled attempt to gain control of my assets, a step towards declaring me incompetent. My blood boiled. This was it. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were coming for my money while I was still alive. The audacity was breathtaking. I immediately called my own lawyer, Mr. Davies, a shrewd old man who had handled my affairs for decades. I didn't tell him the full, horrifying truth about the attempted poisoning, but I laid out enough to convey the gravity of the situation. Mr. Davies, I began, my voice firm, my daughter and her husband are attempting to gain access to my finances. They're claiming I'm confused. It's an outrageous lie. I want you to make it clear that I am fully capable of managing my own affairs, and any attempt to suggest otherwise will be met with the full force of the law. Mr. Davies, familiar with my sharp mind and independent spirit, listened patiently. Eleanor, I understand. This is a common tactic among desperate relatives. I will draft a letter immediately, advising them that any further attempts to interfere with your personal finances will be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly. And if they persist, we can explore legal action to protect you. His words were a small comfort, a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. At least I had legal recourse, a professional shield against their machinations. But I knew this was just the beginning. Mark wouldn't give up. His desperation, coupled with his brazen ruthlessness, would drive him to more extreme measures. He'd already tried to poison me. What would be next? I reviewed the footage from my newly installed cameras nightly. So far, nothing overtly suspicious. Just the usual mailman, a few neighbors walking their dogs. But I knew they were watching. I could feel their eyes, a phantom weight on my back. The fear was a constant companion, a dull throb beneath my skin, but it no longer paralyzed me. Instead, it sharpened my senses, made me more cunning, more determined. One evening, as I was reviewing footage, something did catch my eye. A dark sedan, unfamiliar to the neighborhood, driving slowly past my house, not once, but twice, late at night. The driver's face was obscured, but the pattern of its movement was deliberate, casing the place. My heart hammered. They were planning something. A more direct approach. The fear solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I couldn't wait for them to make their move. I had to anticipate them, to set my own trap. I had to turn the hunter into the hunted. My house was a fortress, yes, but it could also be a stage. And I, this seemingly frail old woman, would be the director of the final, deadly act. I would use their own greed, their own arrogance, against them. The final confrontation was coming, and I would be ready. The ominous appearance of the dark sedan confirmed my worst fears. Mark, or someone in his employ, was escalating. The legal threats hadn't deterred him, they had simply made him more cautious, pushing him towards more covert and, likely, more dangerous methods. I knew he wouldn't risk another direct poisoning in public. His amnesia was a perfect cover for his own collapse, painting him as a victim. He would need a new strategy, one that removed me from the equation definitively and without leaving a trace that could be linked back to him. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened alert, my senses finely tuned to every anomaly. I avoided my usual afternoon walks, fearing I'd be vulnerable outside my protected home. Every delivery truck, every unfamiliar car driving past, drew my scrutiny. The camera footage became my nightly ritual, searching for patterns, for any subtle sign of their next move. Then, a new piece of information surfaced, chilling in its implication. While subtly researching Mark's past financial dealings, I stumbled upon an old news article about a distant relative of his, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago after a contentious property dispute. The disappearance had been ruled accidental, a boating mishap, but the details in the article felt disturbingly similar to Mark's current desperation. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just about money, it was about a pattern of ruthlessness, a history of removing obstacles. My mind began to formulate a plan, a dangerous gambit that would require every ounce of my cunning and courage. I had to lure them into a trap, expose their true intentions, and gather irrefutable evidence. I needed to create a scenario where their villainy would be undeniable, even to the most skeptical detective. The idea came to me one sleepless night, an audacious scheme centered around my most valuable possession, a small, exquisitely carved jade elephant, a gift from Thomas on our 30th anniversary. It was worth a considerable sum. More importantly, it held immense sentimental value. But it also represented a perfect bait. I crafted a seemingly innocent email to Sarah, copying it to a few other distant, rarely contacted relatives, enough to make it appear genuine but unlikely to raise immediate alarm. The subject line read, "Updating my will and valuables." In the email, I wrote, "Dearest Sarah, as you know, after Mark's recent unfortunate health scare, I've been thinking a great deal about my affairs. I've decided it's time to finalize my will and ensure all my treasured possessions are accounted for. I've just had my jade elephant appraised, and it's come back with a truly surprising valuation. I've decided to move it to a more secure location, and I'll be having a company collect it next Tuesday morning. I wanted to let you know, and to ensure everyone is clear on the disposition of my assets in my final will. I'll be in touch with further details after the collection." It was a blatant lie, of course. The elephant wasn't going anywhere, and there was no company. But it was designed to achieve several critical objectives. Create a deadline, next Tuesday morning, gave them a tight window, forcing them to act quickly before the valuable was supposedly moved. Highlight a target. The mention of the jade elephant would focus their greed on a tangible, easily stealable item. Feigned vulnerability. Moving a valuable item implied my house would be momentarily vulnerable, a prime target for a break-in or forced entry. Implying a reward. The mention of disposition of my assets in my final will would reinforce the idea that securing my death before I finalized things was paramount, or at least, getting their hands on assets now. Setting a stage. The timing, Tuesday morning, suggested I would be alone, an easy target. I pressed send, my finger trembling slightly. The trap was laid. Now, I just had to wait for them to walk into it. The hours that followed were agonizing. I busied myself with preparing my stage. I strategically placed a few other moderately valuable items, a silver tea set, an antique clock, in plain sight, near the jade elephant, to make the staged theft more convincing. I meticulously cleaned my house, ensuring every surface was fingerprint-free except where I wanted them to leave their own. I even practiced my distraught victim face in the mirror, an old woman trembling with fear. Then I focused on the most critical element, the cameras. I double-checked their functionality, ensured their cloud recording was active, and even installed a small, almost invisible body camera on myself, disguised as a brooch, which would capture audio and video of the confrontation. This was my ultimate proof, undeniable evidence of their actions and words. My chosen location for the confrontation was my living room, specifically around the antique cabinet where the jade elephant proudly sat. It was an area covered by multiple angles of my hidden cameras. I arranged a few comfortable chairs, creating an illusion of normalcy, a deceptive stage for the impending drama. I also thought about Betty, my safety net. I called her that evening. "Betty, darling, I'm feeling a little under the weather lately. Could you possibly pop over on Tuesday morning, say around 11? I could really use a friendly face, and perhaps you could help me sort through some old photos." It was a loose appointment, late enough that the supposed collection would have already occurred, but early enough for her to find me, and the aftermath, if things went terribly wrong. And crucially, it would provide an alibi for my presence in the house. Monday passed in a blur of anticipation and mounting dread. I didn't hear from Sarah, which was telling. They were busy. Planning. Their silence was a scream. Tuesday morning dawned, crisp and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within my house. I put on my usual comfortable housecoat, but beneath it, the tiny body camera hummed, a silent sentinel. I made myself a simple breakfast, forcing down every bite, knowing I needed my strength. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone chimed. It was an anonymous text message. "We received your email. We'll be there to discuss your arrangements. Expect us shortly." No sender ID, just a ghost of a message. My hands clenched, but a strange sense of calm settled over me. The trap was sprung. They were coming. This was it. The final act. I took a deep breath, adjusted the brooch, and walked into my living room, the stage for my last, desperate stand. I sat in my armchair, the jade elephant gleaming from the cabinet, a silent, beautiful decoy. I was ready. The waiting was the hardest part. Every rustle of leaves outside, every distant car passing by, made my heart lurch. I sat in my armchair, perfectly still, a silent statue in my own living room. The jade elephant, gleaming faintly from its spot in the antique cabinet, felt like a magnet drawing them in. The hidden cameras, my silent witnesses, hummed imperceptibly. The brooch, with its tiny, recording eye, felt heavy against my chest. At precisely 9:47 a.m., the familiar dark sedan pulled into my driveway. Not a casual visit, not even a hurried arrival. It was a deliberate, almost theatrical entrance. Mark emerged first, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his face a mask of false concern. Sarah followed, her usual disheveled appearance replaced by a sharp, almost defiant poise. She wore a dark dress, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes hard. Any illusion of her being a manipulated pawn vanished in that moment. She was a participant, a willing accomplice. My heart ached with a profound, crushing sadness, a grief for the daughter I had lost long before this moment. But there was no time for sorrow, only survival. I rose slowly as they entered, my movements deliberately fragile. "Mark." "Sarah." "What a surprise," I said, my voice thin, a convincing tremor running through it. Mark offered a practiced, sympathetic smile. "Eleanor, darling. We got your email. We were so worried. This talk of moving valuables and all these changes to your will. At your age, such stress can be overwhelming." His words were sugar-coated poison, an immediate attack on my mental faculties. Sarah stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the living room, lingering on the jade elephant. "Mom, why didn't you tell us you were having the elephant moved? We could have helped. This is all very sudden." Her voice was devoid of genuine concern, replaced by a calculating curiosity. "I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs, thank you," I replied, my voice gaining a hint of its usual steel, deliberately letting a touch of indignation show through. "And I decided to make these decisions privately. The collection company is due any minute." Mark exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with Sarah. That was the trigger. The deadline. Their window of opportunity. "Eleanor," Mark began, his voice losing its forced tenderness, hardening with a barely concealed impatience. "We've been doing some thinking about your health and your memory. Sarah and I are genuinely concerned. This idea that you're suddenly capable of managing such complex affairs, especially after your episode with my coffee, it just doesn't seem right." Sarah nodded vigorously. "Mom, we love you, but you've been acting strangely. The doctors at the hospital said Mark's collapse was a serious neurological event. And now this talk of moving valuables, changing wills, we're worried you're not making sound decisions." The accusation hung in the air, blunt and brutal. They weren't just implying, they were outright stating their intention to declare me mentally unfit. My carefully laid trap was closing. "So," I said, my voice remarkably calm, considering the storm raging within me, "you believe I'm no longer capable of managing my own life?" Mark stepped closer, his smile now a wolfish baring of teeth. "Let's just say, Eleanor, that we believe it's time for you to relinquish control. For your own good, of course. We can manage your assets much more efficiently and ensure you're comfortable, naturally. Perhaps in a nice, quiet facility where you won't have to worry about such mundane things." My breath hitched. A facility. They weren't just after my money, they were after my freedom, my very autonomy. The jade elephant was just a pretext, a distraction from their true goal. This wasn't a robbery, it was a hostile takeover. And what about my will, Mark? I asked, my gaze unwavering. What about the disposition of my assets? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Well, Eleanor, if you're deemed incapacitated, your current will would be rendered invalid. And then, as your next of kin, Sarah and I would be in a position to ensure your legacy is managed appropriately. He paused, his eyes gleaming with avarice as he looked at the jade elephant. Unless, of course, certain valuable items were to disappear before then. That would certainly simplify matters. Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and venomous. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. Just sign the papers. Grant us power of attorney. It's for your own good. She held out a sheaf of documents, a pen already uncapped. I looked from Sarah's cold, hard face to Mark's predatory smirk. The pain of her betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. This wasn't my daughter anymore. This was a stranger, corrupted by greed. You want me to sign away my life savings, my home, my independence? I asked, my voice rising slightly, injecting just enough indignation to seem like a frightened old woman. After what you tried to do to me. After you tried to poison me. The words hung in the air, a sudden, shocking accusation. Mark's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine alarm. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Poison? Mark scoffed, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. Eleanor, what are you talking about? We're talking about your well-being. This is precisely what we mean by your confusion. Oh, I'm not confused, Mark, I said, my voice now perfectly steady, every trace of fear gone. I remember everything. The strange smell in the coffee. The blue jay you so conveniently pointed out. And the little vial you dropped, the one containing the synthetic opioid derivative you intended to put in my cup. I reached into my housecoat, pulling out the small, Ziploc baggie, holding up the vial like a deadly trophy. This little beauty. Does it look familiar? Their faces drained of color. Mark's eyes widened in raw, unadulterated shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Sarah whimpered, her facade crumbling instantly, revealing the terrified, guilty woman beneath. You switched the cups, Mark whispered, the realization dawning on him, his voice thick with horror. You let me drink it? Indeed, Mark, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. You drank your own medicine. A harsh lesson, wouldn't you agree? I felt the subtle vibration of the body camera against my chest, recording every word, every horrified gasp. My revenge was unfolding perfectly. This is insane. Mark finally managed, his voice rising in panic. You're crazy, Eleanor. You poisoned me. No, Mark, I corrected, my voice sharp, unforgiving. You tried to poison me. I merely ensured you reaped what you sowed. And now I have everything I need to prove it. I then gestured vaguely around the room. Every word you've said, every action you've taken since you walked through that door, is being recorded. My house is wired. Your threats, your plans to declare me incompetent, your confession about the poison, it's all on camera. For the police. For the world to see. Sarah let out a piercing shriek, her knees buckling. Mom, no. Please, Mom. Mark, however, snarled, his eyes blazing with a desperate, animalistic fury. He lunged towards me, his hand outstretched, aiming for the vial. Give me that. You crazy old witch. But I was ready. My hand shot out, not to block him, but to hit a small, concealed button beneath the armrest of my chair. At the same moment, I cried out, a genuine scream of fear, loud and clear for the cameras. A loud, piercing alarm blared through the house, so sudden and deafening it made them both recoil. It was my security system, programmed to sound not only a local alarm, but also to send an immediate alert to the police. Mark froze, his face a mask of terror, realizing his time was up. Sarah was openly sobbing, her body racked with tremors. The police are on their way, Mark, I said, my voice steady now, devoid of all pretense. And they're going to hear everything. Every word you've uttered. Every truth you've revealed. His gaze darted frantically around the room, finally landing on the hidden camera lens above the fireplace, then to the glint of the brooch on my chest. The realization of the full extent of my trap, the overwhelming evidence I had meticulously gathered, finally broke him. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He was caught. And I, the quiet old woman he had underestimated, had won. The wail of the sirens grew louder, piercing through the blare of my own alarm, a sound of righteous vindication. Mark stood frozen, his face a mask of utter defeat, the predatory gleam in his eyes replaced by a hollow, terrified stare. Sarah had collapsed onto the floor, a weeping, broken heap, muttering incoherent pleas. The dramatic facade of their planned takeover had shattered into a million pieces. I remained seated in my armchair, the jade elephant gleaming serenely from its cabinet, a silent witness to the unfolding chaos. My hand still clutched the Ziploc baggie with the vial, my ultimate trump card. The small body camera, still recording, felt like a silent, powerful ally against the monstrous betrayal that had unfolded in my home. Within minutes, uniformed officers burst through my front door, followed closely by Detective Morgan, her expression grim and unyielding. She took in the scene, the blaring alarm, the sobbing woman on the floor, Mark standing rigid with terror, and me, the seemingly frail old woman, calmly holding a tiny vial. "Eleanor," Detective Morgan said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "What is going on here?" "Detective," I replied, my voice steady, betraying no hint of the tremor that still lurked beneath the surface. "My son-in-law, Mark Peterson, and my daughter, Sarah Vance Peterson, were attempting to coerce me into signing over my assets. They've also confessed to attempting to poison me just a few days ago." I held up the vial. "This is the poison he intended for me. And every word of their confession, every threat, is on tape." I indicated the hidden cameras with a subtle nod, then tapped the brooch on my chest. Detective Morgan's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise breaking through her professional stoicism. She gestured to her officers. "Secure the premises. Separate them. And get Eleanor's statement. Immediately." The next hours were a whirlwind of activity. Mark and Sarah were swiftly taken into custody, their protests weak and pathetic. Mark tried to cling to his amnesia defense, but the recording of his explicit confession, his rage, and his plans to declare me incompetent would be undeniable. Sarah's hysterical pleas quickly turned into desperate attempts to minimize her involvement, blaming Mark, crying about being manipulated. But her own words, her complicity in the plan to commit me to a facility, would speak for themselves. I gave my statement to Detective Morgan, laying out every detail, from the initial desperate loan request to the poison, the cup swap, my own investigation, and finally, the elaborate trap I had set. I presented the vial, carefully handled by the forensics team, and explained the recording devices. Detective Morgan listened, her initial skepticism slowly replaced by a look of dawning understanding, then a grim respect. "Mrs. Vance," she said, after I had finished, her voice softer than before. "This is quite extraordinary. You were remarkably resourceful." I simply looked at her, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. "I merely refused to be a victim, Detective." The legal proceedings that followed were long and arduous, a painful public spectacle that dragged my family's dirty laundry through the headlines. Mark, facing a mountain of evidence, my recordings, the recovered vial, which forensic tests confirmed contained the potent opioid derivative, his long history of financial fraud, and Sarah's eventual, tearful confession, had no choice but to plead guilty to attempted murder, aggravated assault, and financial fraud. He received a lengthy prison sentence, his dreams of ill-gotten wealth dissolving into the harsh reality of steel bars. Sarah's fate was more complex and in many ways more tragic. Her confession, detailing Mark's manipulation and her own desperation, coupled with her lesser degree of direct involvement in the poisoning attempt, earned her a plea deal. She was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. She received a shorter sentence, followed by strict probation, but the true punishment for her was the complete severance of our relationship and the profound public shame. My grandchildren, heartbroken and confused, eventually moved in with their paternal aunt, shielded from the immediate fallout of their parents' crimes. The aftermath left a profound emptiness in my life. The physical danger was gone, but the emotional wounds ran deep. My daughter, the woman I had raised, was lost to me, swallowed by greed and fear. The quiet of my house returned, but it was a different quiet now, the quiet of a battlefield after the war, the echoes of screams still lingering in the air. I sold the jade elephant. Its beauty was now tainted by the memory of betrayal, its value diminished by the cost of what it had nearly claimed. I donated a significant portion of its sale to a charity supporting victims of elder abuse, a small gesture to reclaim its worth. Life, however, slowly began to mend. I started taking my walks again, the fresh air a balm to my weary soul. I found solace in my garden, nurturing the delicate blossoms, finding strength in their resilience. Betty, my steadfast friend, remained my anchor, a comforting presence in the aftermath of the storm. We still had our Friday lunches, but now there was an unspoken understanding, a deeper bond forged in shared, unshared secrets. I thought often of Mark and Sarah, not with anger, but with a profound sadness. Their desperation had driven them to monstrous acts, and they had paid a heavy price. But I, too, had paid a price. My innocence, my trusting nature, my belief in the sanctity of family, these had been irrevocably shattered. One evening, as the sun set, painting my living room in hues of gold and crimson, I sat in my armchair, a new crossword puzzle open on my lap. I paused, looking out at the world, at the cardinals pecking at the feeder, at the enduring rhythm of life. My quiet life had indeed been broken, but in its shards, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The silence in my house now was not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of peace, hard-earned and deeply cherished. It was the sound of survival,